Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of October of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev because today Zelensky presented his victory plan. Zelensky victory plan. What was he talking about? And his plan has 5 paragraphs. And the first and the most important paragraph is that NATO should invite Ukraine today to NATO. Not tomorrow, not in the next century, not the next year, but today, now. Zelensky wants Ukraine to be invited to NATO now. This is the most important paragraph, and everything is based on this. The second paragraph is that Ukraine needs to increase its own production and increase aid from Western partners, which means give us more weapons, give us technologies, and we will do everything we can on the territory of Ukraine. The third thing is that deployment of a comprehensive non-nuclear strategic package in Ukraine, which will be enough to protect Ukraine from any military threat from Russia. As for this paragraph, some military experts are saying that Zelensky was talking about some forces, about real forces, real soldiers of NATO countries that can be deployed on the territory of Ukraine to stop the Russians. But other military experts are saying that the third paragraph is about long-range missiles that Ukraine can use to attack deep inside of territory of Russia. We are talking about, as for Germany, Taurus cruise missiles. As for the United Kingdom, we're talking about Storm Shadows. As for the United States of America, we're talking about ATACMS missiles and different bombs. So the weapon that Ukraine can use, and it should be long-range weapon that Ukraine can use to attack deep inside of Russia, which will also, according to Zelensky understanding, reduce the threat from the Russian Federation. And of course, he is saying about economic pressure on Russia, in particular restrictions on oil prices and exports. And the fifth paragraph is not like a paragraph, it's not something that NATO countries should do. It's like the results of everything in the end. And Ukraine, Zelensky is saying that if you follow these paragraphs, by the way, I'll remind you that there are 5 paragraphs in this victory plan and 3 paragraphs, additional secret paragraphs that nobody knows, just Joe Biden, probably Zelensky himself, maybe NATO, let's say officers, so it's the most important people in the world telling these words. And the 5th paragraph of this victory plan is that Ukraine will have one of the most experienced military army after the war. So trying to say that if you follow everything we suggest you, we ask you, then we're gonna have very powerful army that can even attack Russia in the future. So just to remind you about the situation. So telling the truth, when talking about this plan, we can't call this plan as victory plan or peace plan. Obviously, this is ultimatum to the Western countries. Zelensky is tired of the special military operation. He understands that the population of Ukraine are not going to suffer these problems any longer. Most likely, the Russians will destroy the energy facilities during upcoming winter, and he has just one option, Zelensky. First, either to capitulate or to force NATO countries to start supporting Ukraine as it possibly was promised before the special military operation, and so on. And for example, today the NATO officials, NATO authorities have already made their own statements regarding Zelensky's words, and they said that the United States has once again stated that it does not intend to invite Ukraine to NATO. The current situation does not favor inviting Ukraine to NATO. That was said by US Permanent Representative to Alliance, Julian Smith. And of course, when talking about official statements, it doesn't matter what people are saying right now. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden is going to talk or say it regarding Zelensky peace plan. It doesn't matter what Julian Smith is going to talk about. It doesn't matter. The most important is everything that currently is taking place behind the scene. And obviously, lots of things are happening. First of all, this is not a victory plan. This is not a peace plan. This is ultimatum to the Western countries. And everything is as following. Either you begin supporting us by the end of this year, including joining Ukraine to NATO, or we surrender. And not just surrender, we are capitulating to Russia, and you, the Western countries, Western companies, Western investors will lose everything you invested in Ukraine, because Russia will not give you anything. Of course, Russia will not take entire Ukraine, but obviously there are going to be a lot of changes. The Ukrainian political system will be changed, the Ukrainian history, understanding of the reality will be changed, and the most important, the Ukrainian understanding of the special military operation will be changed in Russian favor. And obviously this is going to happen, and in generations everything will be understood. People will understand everything as Russia will write in the next Ukrainian history. So this is the problem. And once again, it doesn't matter what the Western countries are saying right now, Joe Biden. The most important, and we need to follow the reaction of one important group of Ukraine, and we're talking about Nazi battalions. Because Zelensky threatened not just to the Western countries that he is going to surrender or to capitulate if you don't stop support Ukraine. He threatened that Ukrainians will capitulate, and this is not something that fits with the requirements and the interests of the Nazi battalions. And now we should pay attention to their reaction, because if they began acting, if they began threatening Zelensky with the strikes, with the protests, with attempts to remove him from his president chair, that means that NATO countries don't accept Zelensky plan, and they began the plan B. And the plan B is to start using the Nazi forces in Ukraine to, let's say, dismiss Zelensky from his position. But if in the very near future we don't see any reaction from the Nazi forces, like 12 separate Azov brigade, like 67th brigade, like right sector forces and so on, then NATO's countries and the Western countries accept Ukrainian ultimatum, and they will act, and they will do everything they can in favor of Ukraine by the end of this year, including inviting Ukraine into the NATO organization. So this is the situation, so let's follow. But once again, very likely that during the next few weeks there might be military coup in Ukraine, and Nazi forces will replace Zelensky by someone who will be established, who will be assigned on this position by the Western countries, by the United States of America. Now let's move further, and let's talk about the course direction, because we received a lot of very interesting updates from this territory. As you can see, we have changes on the ground, we have changes in the northern flank, in the eastern flank, in the western flank, in the southern flank. So let's discuss in details. Today, pro-Russian sources published the video of how the Russian soldiers were moving through the village of Volgovka. There are lots of episodes, a lot of scenes, some chickens running across the street, and one of the episodes was discovered exactly in this point. And based on this video, we have adjusted this part in Russian favor. Now let's move further, and let's talk about the territory between the village of Kremenoe and Sheptukhovka. For example, in this video, in this photo, we can see the destroyed Challenger, the second of United Kingdom, and this Challenger was spotted and discovered by the Russians exactly in this point, and we can see there is a Russian official media was walking in this forest and making this video, which confirms at least Russian control over this forest. We have additional changes on the ground between Kremenoe and Novaya Sorochina, and in this video that was published just 5 minutes before we begin making this video, we can see a Russian tank, Russian personal carrier that was heading towards the Ukraine positions. Maybe the Russians missed the point, or they didn't realize where exactly they were moving, but as you can see, within a very short distance, the Ukrainian forces of 17th Tank Brigade attacked the Russian personal carrier and destroyed it. So this event took place exactly in this area, and the Russian tank was moving something like this. And this Russian movement confirms that the Russians control this part of the forest as well. So if we change the map, and if we can compare the map for the 15th of October and 16th of October, we will understand everything. As you can see, the territories that today we colored in Russian favor used to be considered as a contested area. Today, on the 16th of October, we just received the geolocations and videos that confirm Russian additional progress on the ground in the northern Sudzha direction. Now let's move to the village of Lyubimovka. we have two geolocations from this area. For example, in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing the church in the central part of the settlement, and Ukrainians are saying that the church was captured by the Russians and the Russians had their positions there, and the Ukrainians began bombing these territories. Based on this video, first in this morning of the 16th of October we have colored this part of Lyubimovka in Russian favor. Later we got another video that was published by pro-Russian sources, and in this video we can see a convoy, Russian convoy, that was moving along the main street of Lyubimovka towards the village of Zelený Shlях. So I would like to point your attention to this scene, to this episode. You can see the shape of the village of Lyubimovka, and this is exactly this half circle shape of the most eastern part of the settlement. This is it on this scene of the video. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor in the northern and in the eastern part of the settlement, so everything in this part was colored. To compare the map, this is the situation on the 15th of October and this is the situation on the 16th of October. Currently we still haven't received anything from the territory between Толстый Луг, Зеленый Шлях, Нижний Клин and Sverdlyukovo. I'll remind you that according to pro-Russian sources, there is a cauldron. The significant number of Ukrainians were encircled exactly in this part. The sources are saying that there is up to 1 battalion of the armored forces of Ukraine that stuck in this direction and currently can't evacuate from this territory. Furthermore, I'll remind you that there is another cauldron of the armored forces of Ukraine in the territory between the village of Volgovka, Kremennoye and Zelený Shlях. We're talking about this part. Some mappers have already adjusted this territory in Russian favor, but as for pro-Ukrainian sources, they still show this territory as a territory under complete Ukraine control, but obviously the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to escape the territory and they are encircled. And now we are moving to the most important updates that is coming from the line between the villages of Zelený Shlях, Novoivanovka, Leonidovka, Viktorovka and Staraya Sorochina. Pro-Russian sources, pro-Russian military experts and pro-Russian mappers reported that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to improve their positions and to capture the villages of Novoivanovka, Leonidovo, Alexandria and Viktorovka from the line to the east of Zelený Shlях, and the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern direction of the village of Novaya Sorochina and to take under control the village of Staraya Sorochina. So this is the progress of the Russians from the north to the south, and this is the Russian progress from the west in the eastern direction. And based on these reports of pro-Russian sources, we can make a conclusion that one of the biggest groups of armored forces of Ukraine that is currently located between the villages of Kremennoye, Staraya Sorochina, Leonidovo, Orlovka, Pogribki, Novoselovka, we're talking about this part of the Sudzha direction, was encircled by the Russians. And obviously this is the significant progress and the significant achievement of the armored forces of Russian Federation, because when talking about the Ukrainians in Olga, it's just 1 battalion that was encircled. The same story about Lyubimovka, up to 1 battalion was encircled, maybe even less. But as for this direction, as for this cauldron, as for this pocket, I believe that up to 1 brigade was encircled by the Russians. So summarizing everything from these 3 cauldrons, we can make a conclusion that according to the most positive scenario that was written by pro-Russian sources to the armored force of Russian Federation, up to 1 brigade and a half was encircled in the northern and the northwestern part of the Sudzha direction, and we are talking about from 4 till 6,000 soldiers. If this information is correct, then this is the significant defeat of the armored forces of Ukraine that can lead to complete collapse of the entire direction and to significant consequences for the armored forces of Ukraine, not just in the Sudzha direction but also in the city of Sumy. The source reported that Zelensky is sending more and more troopers in these directions to stabilize the line of combat contact, but most likely he lost his time and he is not able to change anything here in Ukrainian favor, or at least to stabilize the situation into 50-50 situation. Now let's move to the northern Kharkiv direction. We have additional updates. Yesterday we discussed the situation that the Russians, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, were trying to break through the border and to attack the territory of Ukraine in the Zolochiv direction. For these purposes, the Russians were using up to 4 armored vehicles. Some of the armored vehicles were destroyed on the road to the village of Zhuravlyovka, and a few vehicles were destroyed on the most southwestern outskirts of the settlement. In this video, we can see several FPV drone attacks on Russian vehicles that were attacking the Ukrainian positions. And the most important, that today on the 16th of October we got another video from pro-Russian sources, and in this video we can see how the Russians were bombing the forest along the border, which confirms that Ukrainians during the previous few days managed to take this territory under complete control and to force the Russians to fall back. So basically the Russians made several attempts to counterattack, but most of those attempts were repelled by the Ukrainian side. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. We continue receiving updates about very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have already announced the complete evacuation from the territory of the Kupiansk agglomeration. We're talking about thousands of people. Of course, this is a very long process, and as soon as the process will be finished, most likely the Russians will be able to begin the full-scale offensive operation in this direction as well. As for pro-Russian sources, they are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the river of Oskol. Currently, the significant number of buildings and houses were already captured by the Russians on the line between the villages of Kruglyakivka and the village of Kolesnikovka, and according to some pro-Russian sources, this is the exact situation on the ground by the evening of the 16th of October. Obviously, this is the significant progress of the Russians. The Ukrainians now need to think what to do next, but obviously, by the fact they announced the evacuation of the entire Kupiansk agglomeration, most likely the Ukrainians do have intelligence information that the Kupiansk and the Kupiansk agglomeration itself is the next target and the next priority of the armored force of Russian Federation. Now let's move further and let's talk about the south and Kupiansk direction. We have additional changes on the ground, as you can see. Yes, this is the map on the 15th of October and this is the map on the 16th of October. As you can see, we have adjusted the territory in Russian favor, and we made the changes based on two things. First, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to take under control the village of Nevska, and few hours later the Russian sources, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, also provided us the video with the Russian flag that was raised in the most northern part of the settlement. I believe that the Russians learned some lessons from the situation of the Siversk direction, when to make a statement it's not enough to change the colors for military summary map. So that's why I believe for us, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation decided to use two evidence at once, to provide report during the Ministry of Defense report and to provide additional video. So based on these two things, we have adjusted the map, and most of the mappers did the same. The only thing we still have some doubts about this part. Most likely the Ukrainians either are about to finish the evacuation, their forces of 67th Mechanized Brigade, or they have already finished, and maybe during the next few days we will color this territory in Russian favor as well. As for the Siversk direction, we have made changes on the ground, but as for this part of the front line, we did the changes in Ukrainian favor because during the day we received a significant number of videos of geolocations of how the Russians were continue bombing the most northeastern stronghold of Verkhnyi Kamyanska, and as you can see, we have enough of proofs that the Russians haven't established control over the settlement, and the video with the Russian flag was a fake video or something like this. And I'll remind you that some sources reported that the Russians raised the flag in the most western part of Verkhnyi Kamyansk with just a regular drone. Now everything is clear to us. The settlement is under complete Ukrainian control, and the stronghold most likely is under complete Ukrainian control as well. Now let's move to the south. We continue receiving the significant number of videos from the southern part of Chasiv Yar. If we increase the numbers of this since the beginning of months, we see that the Russians, after the Russians managed to take under control and to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbass River canal in this part, the Russians continue concentration of forces before the beginning of the full-scale offensive in the southern part. Just during the previous month, since the beginning of October, we received at least four 5 videos exactly from this point of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian citadels and the Ukrainian strongholds, preparing the foothold before the further offensive operation. Currently, we don't know for sure the exact deadline for this attack, but obviously we can start counting days. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Toretsk agglomeration, because during the previous 24 hours we received significant number of updates. We got lots of videos that were published by pro-Ukrainian sources of how they were FPV droning and attacking the Russian forces in this area. Lots of episodes took place between the central mine and the prison number 2, and we have lots of videos in the most eastern part that was published by the 42nd Mechanized Brigade, and lots of episodes were geolocated. Let's compare the map. This is the situation on the ground on this 15th of October. This is the situation on the 16th of October. So as you can see, in most cases we have adjusted the contested area in Russian favor. There is just one street and one block of building that was colored in Russian favor based on the geolocation that was published by the 42nd Mechanized Brigade. So this is the situation on the ground. There are still lots of job to do, but the Russians are moving and they're cutting this Toretsk pie in many pieces. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours there were almost no movements on the ground, just lots of updates about the situation on the ground, and the sources are saying that the situation in the city of Selidova is very critical. The Ukrainian forces can't hold the flanks, and the Russians are pushing and pushing, trying to encircle the city completely. As for the Kurakhova direction, we have received just several videos of how the Russians were bombing the city of the town of Gornyak. Most likely during the next few days we're gonna see a full-scale of offensive operation in this direction, but as for now the situation remains the same. During the previous 24 hours we received a significant number of updates from the Bagayavlenka direction. Lots of FPV drone attacks. The Russians also were bombing the village itself. In this video, for example, we can see the most southwestern stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine in the town that was destroyed as a result of Russian FAB attack. So the Russians are preparing the foothold before further offensive operation, and based on the geolocations and the places geolocations are located, we can make a conclusion, we can understand how exactly and where exactly the Russians are going to attack. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just pro-Ukrainian sources confirm the Russian progress between the villages of Livadne and the village of Priyutino. Today also we got additional details about the Russian Iskander strike that took place yesterday in Nikolaev. I'll remind you that the Russian sources published the video of how they were attacking the same planes, the same point, with the use of 5 Iskander missiles, and the sources are saying that the Russians attacked the tank factory, the biggest tank factory in Ukraine. Most likely the Ukrainians were using this tank factory to repair tanks and to improve them, and this factory was completely destroyed, and this information was also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian resources. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.